Good afternoon. It is Sunday, Easter Sunday, 2018, and it is also April Fool's Day, although I actually have not heard anyone mention that today, which is maybe a good thing. I haven't had any jokes played on me so far. I wanted to come on and do a little quick talk with you guys today. I had not actually intended on doing this, but I found myself a little extra time, and I had a lot of thoughts on my mind that I really wanted to share. So I thought I would come on, and if anybody's out there listening, feel free to join me. I'd love to hear from you. Hey, Mandy Westmoreland, I see Mandy's on. I just wanted to share this with you guys, and for those of you that joined me after the live video, if you have any questions and you want to message me, feel free to do so. You can either message me through Facebook, or my email is Little Dumplings, which is LILDUMPLINS@gmail.com. And what I wanted to talk to you about today is PanPastels. Several of you have noticed that I have now been adding to the last class, air dry class I was teaching. I added a little work with PanPastels, just introduction to PanPastels, to let the students play with them in class and see how they work, and let the students decide for themselves if they like using them or not. I will be teaching an air dry painting class at IDTS in June in Florida, and we will be doing the same there. I will be teaching how to paint. One way you can paint using the Reborn FX paints. Those are air dry paints, and then I will be letting the students play with PanPastels a little bit in class that day as well. I want to explain what PanPastels are, and I have some here, so let me grab one to show you. Just the first one I grabbed, this is actually the ultramarine blue shade. PanPastels are a product that is an artist pastel. It's produced in a powder cake-like consistency. They are very, very, very strong pigment. The company says they can be used in multimedia. They are compatible to air dry paints and other mediums. If you go to their website, you can read more about what they are compatible with. The biggest thing I can say about them, I've seen pictures of them where people are using them on paper and doing some beautiful paint. They call it painting. They use a little tool where they put the tips on a, let me show you what I'm talking about. So they have these little applicators that you can get like this, and then you can buy tips. Where did I lay my tips? That are called soft covers, S-O-F-F-T. So these are the triangle shaped tips, and you can put those on the end of these. They slide on and off so that you can replace them, and then you'll see people painting on paper with them and that kind of thing. They also have soft sponges, the art sponges, which are the bigger blocks in different sizes. Those are some small ones, and I've got bigger ones somewhere in my bucket. I've got two. Well, this is a bigger one, but I've about worn it out. But anyway, so they have different sizes, and these are used to blend and kind of spread around the PanPastels a little bit on the surface that you're working on. Hey, Tad Mills, I can't believe you're watching this today. Hey, Michelle Higgins, hope you're having a good Easter. But all you guys, the biggest thing about PanPastels that I wanted to talk about today, because I think there's been a little bit of possibly some confusion, and that is that they are very, 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 very pigmented. And while they can be used, and I like using them to accentuate reborn doll painting, they are not the same thing as the powders that people are using, like Coastal Scents powders that some people use to paint and enhance their dolls with. There is another lady who has developed a powders method. She was the first person to actually be in recent years talking about painting with powders, and she uses and recommends, I think at one time she used Grima's, I don't know how you say that, and then she's also used Coastal Scents, and I think that's the last I read, that was their choice. I think she still likes using those. I don't follow her stuff. I haven't looked at any of her material in a long time. But the method that she teaches that a lot of people like to use is one where she's using, and Coastal Scents, for those of you that don't know, are actually eyeshadows. They're very pigmented eyeshadows. And she uses a method where she swirls them onto the vinyl and really works them into the vinyl, and stains the vinyl with these coastal scents. And then they work on bare vinyl, they paint their vinyl with air dry paints, that kind of thing. And a lot of people really like that method and use that method. And so I want to clarify, because I have had it come across or come to my attention that some people have tried using the PanPastels and have had some disasters because they were working them into the vinyl and using that method, and the PanPastels don't work or react the same way as the coastal scents, and so they wound up with their vinyls very stained and very dark and very intense. And then they also found that these don't come off easily like the coastal scents do. So once they got it on there, I think that it was then an issue of how in the world do I get this back off. So I wanted to clarify this, that when I introduced PanPastels, it was back in May of 2016. If you go back through my blog, you will see when I first started introducing PanPastels, and it was an idea that I had heard someone else mention along the way. I think during that time people were looking for different things and alternatives to using eyeshadows, because some people were concerned about using makeup on dolls. Other people have had great success with it and have no qualms about it. Some buyers have qualms about it, some don't. You know, that's just like anything else that in the Reborn Art world. Reborn Art evolved as an experiment of someone who took a Behringer, I believe it was, doll apart. I know we used to use Behringer dolls. I don't know if that was the very first one that was used, but I think it was. But, you know, it was born from people taking dolls apart, stripping the paint off, trying to repaint them and make them look more lifelike. And along the way, a lot of things have been done and tried over the years, some of which worked well, some of which worked for some people and not others, and some which didn't work at all. When I first got into Reborn doll painting back in 2004, people were doing things like painting the insides of the dolls with a purple acrylic paint, because the dolls were, the vinyl was kind of orange, and they were trying to offset the orange with purple, which that works. But then when you fill the inside of a doll with purple paint, over time that paint seeps through, and then the doll started looking bruised. And then people were painting with oil paints back then a lot, and then people were also painting with the stencil creams and that kind of thing. I saw some of that. There was a lady who, and I think she still has a website, it was called Prilly Charmin, and she was one of the first people that I actually saw that recommended actually using makeup products to paint dolls with. So makeup products painting dolls, I know, go back prior to the using of makeup eyeshadows. Back then she was using like rouge creams and lip liners and very strong pigmented I don't know if she used eyeshadow or cream eyeshadows, I can't remember, but she was one of the ones that was talking about, I remember back when, using makeup products. And that was, once again, is kind of hit or miss, because a lot of the makeup products she was using were oil-based, and if you were using oil-based paint, then they might be compatible. But, you know, some people found that they had a tendency, some people's held up well over time, and others had a tendency to kind of go orange color. So there's been a lot of things tried over the years. But anyway, getting back to the PanPastels, the PanPastels do not, when you're putting them onto vinyl, they do not, and I don't know what's the word I want to use. They do not disperse and slide around on the vinyl like using coastal scents do. So if you're used to that method, and that's the method you're wanting to use, then I really would say you need to stick to using the method that's taught to you to be. The way it is taught is the way you should use it with those eyeshadows. So if you're using that teaching, then you need to stick to the products that person teaches and uses. If you're looking to use something different, then you know you're going into a different methodology, and therefore you're going to have to experiment a little bit with that, which is what I did and have been doing, and you're going to have to work things a little bit differently. So what I found along the way is that Number one, I did not like putting powders on bare vinyl and then trying to paint over that, or trying to paint a few layers of color and then put powders in between layers and paint more layers and keep building that. And I've seen that done as well. I did not want to do that. What I wanted to be able to do was to build all my paint layers and paint my baby the way I always do, but then use powders at the end to accentuate. I have always been one, from the very get-go, from the very beginning of my days of painting, I have always been one to use more primary colors than I have flesh tones. I can remember back when I first started, people would lay flesh, and even when they got into Genesis and that became popular, it was flesh 08, but prior to that it was even white layers of oil paints that people would put layer and layer and layer on the baby. And the reason they were building all that was because they were trying to offset the color of the vinyl and bring it down to a neutral, colorless, basically, base, and then from there build back into a skin tone. I never really cared for that look because it looked too much like a China porcelain doll to me. I'm not saying that that's a wrong look or that it's a bad look or that that's, you know, I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that was not my preference. So I have always used more an approach of picking colors and balancing my colors. I don't necessarily say go red, yellow, blue, red, yellow, blue, red, yellow, blue. I've always worked more from color families. I would put colors on from the red family, then I'll pick a color from the blue family, then I'll pick a color from the yellow family, and I balance those, and I'll look at my pieces and I say, this is looking a little orangey here. Well, red and yellow make orange. That means I need to add something from the blue family to offset that. So I've always had that in the back of my mind and balancing that, and that's how I have always worked. And then that's not to say that I don't use some flesh tones or haven't used flesh tones, but if I do, I use them very thinned out, and I use them more as a blending layer to go over something to blend it and tone it a little bit. There is I won't say an argument, but there is a thought process that says that if you are using anything outside of your primary colors, that you're adding opaques into your color mix, and therefore you're losing your translucency and losing your realism. I will say that my personal feeling on that is, and this is once again my preference for the look I want, is that is very true, but it is also like anything you do. If you want to follow after using some of those type colors that are more opaque, you have to be very sparing with it, and you have to balance it with what you've already done and what you're going to do. And if you are careful, you can still use those colors and you can still come out with a translucent baby that does not have a deep opaque look to it, and that still has a very lifelike looking skin tone. Now, there are other artists, even artists that are considered prototype artists, or they are prototype artists that sell in the thousands of dollars, and they have built well-known reputations and names for themselves, and they paint using methods that are totally different from mine, and they do use a lot of opaque colors, and I have seen some absolutely gorgeous dolls produced, and dolls that have sold for way more than I could ever imagine selling one of my dolls for. So I would never sit here and say, well, that's wrong because this is right, because, you know, skin tones don't have opaque coloring in them, and they're using opaque coloring, and therefore that's wrong. You know, it gets back to a preference, and the fact that we are talking about art. And we are, you know, some people strive to reproduce a very realistic looking art with their dolls, as realistic to a real life baby as they can, and other people strive to produce a beautiful piece of art that still has a lot of realism, but might be the kind of art that when you look at it, the beauty of the art looks realistic because of the way it's put on the canvas being the doll. It's put on there in such a way that you're not looking at it thinking about, well, this one is more opaque than that one. So I don't know if what I'm saying really makes a lot of sense. I don't mean to be rambling here, but that's just kind of a little bit of, anyway, what I wanted to say on that. So getting back to the PanPastels. When I first started experimenting with the PanPastels, and I actually had some videos, and if you look at my blog, it'll say, you know, you can go to this video on YouTube, and when you go to the video, it's no longer there. And the reason it is no longer there is that in the beginning days when I was trying these out, it was not a here is this and how you use it kind of thing. It was a here is this and I want to try it. Let's see what happens. And it was pretty crude. And I know the first limb that I tried PanPastels on, I used a red color. I think I wound up using the permanent red shade was what I used. And it came out, the creases came out very red. And I knew, and I said in the video, this is way too dark, but I like the way it works on the vinyl, so I'm going to play with this. And so over the years, and here we are now, it's 2018, so we're talking about 2 years now that I have been playing with these off and on. And over the years, I have kind of found my happy niche with it all. April Yap, who is the owner and operator of Sweetie Pie Nursery, is a good friend of mine, and April and I have chatted many times about air dry paints and products, and we both have had the opportunity to test a lot of things over the years. And she has used Coastal Scents methods and was very proficient with that. And when one day we were talking, and I told her I had been playing with the PanPastels, and she got some PanPastels and started playing with them, and we've kind of bounced ideas off of each other at different times. And she kind of took it and ran with it really more than I did, because she really likes using those a lot, and she really wanted to figure it all out. So she has actually written a tutorial, and it is a free tutorial. So for anyone who's looking for a tutorial, because I've been asked if I'm going to write a tutorial on PanPastels, and honestly, no, I won't be writing a tutorial, and the reason being is that April has already written a very good tutorial. And so I will point you to hers and tell you that as far as how to apply the PanPastels, she's got an excellent tutorial. I don't use all the same colors as she does, and I don't use the PanPastels on a Caucasian baby as much as she does. That's just because my methodology is different from hers. But as far as how to apply them, regardless of what colors you choose, she has got an excellent tutorial. So I would encourage you to go to her website, and let me pull it up here where I can see. It is Sweetie Pie Nursery by April.com. That's Sweetie Pie Nursery by April.com. And then when you go to her website, click on free tutorials, and she's got her PanPastel tutorial up, and you can download it for free. And as far as I know, she plans to keep that up for free, but you know, you can download it and save it to your files and print it off just so you have it just in case. And so that is available to you guys, and I would encourage you to go through it and read it, because she tells you how to mix the PanPastels, and she has figured out, and what we both have figured out along the way was that, you know, you've got to cut the intensity of these down to be able to work with them so that they don't just overwhelm the pieces that you're working on. And so she has figured out pretty much a great ratio, being that for every 1 part powder that you use, you're going to add 2 parts colorless blender. And so this is the colorless blender. I'm going to open it up. I want to show it to you. And I do not have great lighting here in my nursery space for video. It's fine for when I'm working, but for video, things kind of come out. Sometimes colors are not real great, and sometimes they are. So keep that in mind in anything I show you here. But this is the colorless blender, and as you see, it looks white, but it is not white on vinyl or on paper. It is actually literally colorless, like they say. Now if I run my finger through this, and let me show you, on my finger that looks white. When I start working it into my skin, you see it dissipates, and it's, well, I'm getting a glare there. There we go. That is the colorless blender, and there's no color there. So that is what is used to cut the pigment so that the pigment's not so intense on your powder. Now I have some white. I have a lot of colors that I have bought that I don't necessarily use or use very little of. But I have some white that I bought at one time. Here we go. Here's the white. And it, as you can maybe see, There is a difference between the white and the colorless blender when you look at them side by side. I don't know if it comes up on camera. This is the white. This is the colorless blender. The white looks like chalk. And the colorless blender almost, and I'm going to say almost, has a slight, ever so slight gray tint to it next to this. But I don't think it's gray. It's the absence of white pigmentation is what it is. But if I take the white, which is this one, and put that on my finger, and I work that into my skin, as you see the difference. You get the opaque white look. So I wanted to show you that because when I bought the white, I did play with the white a little bit with the idea of using it to cut some of the intensity of these colors. The thing about using the white is that white, as you see, it does add some of the opaqueness to it. So I'm not crazy about the look that I get when I add white to the colors, or else if I do or have ever used it, I would use such a very minute amount. But usually I end up going back and adding in more colorless blender. So my white has kind of sat to the back side here, and I haven't really used it a whole lot because the times that I haven't been totally crazy about it. But I was kind of, if you, for example, are used to using Coastal Scents, and you look at, there's colors they have in the recommended colors there. There's an apple teeny, there's a cornflower, I think it is blue. I can't remember some of the other colors, but those colors are too particular in my mind that if you look at them, you immediately know when you look at those colors that they've got white in there with them. They are very translucent the way they're mixed, but I'm just saying that they have been blended with some white to kind of tone down their intensity. So and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying they're white based or they look white or opaque, but I'm just saying you can look at them and tell that they have been tinted so that they're not as intense of a pigment. So I played with the white, but I'm not, once again, you might want to use some white in your mix, and you can find that it works great for you. So far I'm not crazy with it. I'd rather just use the colorless blender. I think if you look at April's tutorial, well, I know because I was reading through it today, when she does some of her purple tones, she does mix just a little bit of white in it, and on her pictures in her tutorial it looks great. So but that once again gets back to a preference of whether or not you want to use it. I have not. The other thing April does differently in her tutorial than anything I've tried is she does this gray shading around the forehead and different places. And I bought some of the gray that she recommends because gray is not a color I have ever used. And I got the gray somewhere, if I can find it. I got the gray, but I haven't played with it. Here it is. This is the color gray called neutral gray that she uses. And it is an opaque color. Honestly, I have not played with it. I thought I might just play with it and see how it looks according to the way she's teaching in her tutorial, but I don't know. I mean, it's not a look that I really ever thought about doing on any of my dolls. So I got it, but I can't tell you that I like it or don't like it because I haven't played with it. But I will tell you what colors that I do use. That's what I wanted to share with you today. So, so I definitely, if you were going to buy the colors that I use and that I like to use, I do definitely recommend you get colorless blender. And then I do every now and again use a little bit of the ultramarine blue shade, and the color number on this is 520.3. 520.3. This is an extremely intense blue, so you have to cut it with the colorless blender. And that is used where, anywhere where you want to enhance blue tones. Typically, I paint my veining. I don't like doing my veining with powders. I have a method that I have mastered myself with my veining where I'm very happy with the way I get my veins looking with paint, and I don't have the roadmap looking lines. I have very subtle veins that look under the skin. But every now and again, if I've added some more layers of paint, I might have a vein when I get done that kind of got a little bit too embedded under my paint and a little bit less noticeable than I want it. And so sometimes I will use the ultramarine blue to go over that when I'm doing my powder and enhance it just a little bit, or like right inside the hands right here. Sometimes I will add the blue right in there to get a little blue color, right under the ears, like right in here where you're wanting some shadowing in the baby. And then in some of these places are the places that April is using in gray color. And then right in here, forehead and places like that. I will say right here too, I guess I should clarify that when I do my pastel painting, I don't do it until after I've painted all my skin tones. So my method is to paint my baby with all the skin tones so that I'm pretty well completely done. The only thing I might not have done yet is my final blushing, and maybe a last blending color, but for the most part I've got the majority of all my skin tones painted. And then some babies I do my creases with paint, and some babies I do my creases with PanPastels, and it depends on the mood I'm in. It just I can't say that one is better than the other. It's just sometimes I want the look of one, and other times I want, and it just depends on the creativity flow I'm having that day. But another color that I always use on my Caucasian babies is the yellow ochre. And this looks, on my screen anyway, it looks way more golden than it is, way more school bus yellow than it is in person. This is a true yellow ochre. Trying to get it to, well, I don't know how it looks on your monitor, but on mine it looks like school bus yellow right now, but it's not. It is a true yellow ochre. And the color is 270.5. And pretty much the only place I like to use this color is around the nose, right in here, where I like to have a little yellow on my baby. And the reason why I don't use it much anywhere else is that because I tend to do some yellow ochre modeling on my baby's skin tones when I'm working with skin tones. So I don't, once again, I use it as an accentuation color. I don't use it as a lot of my actual coloring. Now I have a purple, and if you look at April's tutorial, she uses the purple to, she uses this, it's a 470.5 violet color. And you can use this for purple tones and purple around the finger areas and stuff like that where you want purple tones. But once again, like the blue, and even more so than the blue, this purple is very intense, very intense. And so it has got to be cut with a lot of colorless blender, and like I said, April adds a little white to hers. And then when you're putting it on, you're not going to be just dipping your brush. You're not going to be dipping your brush into a lot of powder like this, and then doing this number right here and working it all in on your vinyl. You are not going to be doing that. Typically, when I put a color on my brush, I will just barely touch the tip of my brush into that color. I tap it off. So there's just barely a hint of color, and then I will just ever lightly pull it through wherever I want to shade a little bit, and then I'll immediately follow up with one of my blending sponges, which April uses the makeup blenders. And I haven't tried the makeup blenders. When I was reading her tutorial, I found that very interesting in that technique, and so I want to try those, because if they work as well as the art sponges, that would be great, because these are kind of expensive. But anyway, so you'll work it in. But I have the purple, and I have played with it a little bit. But honestly, I find that if I over powder anything, this is the color I wind up having problems with. So it's not my favorite color. What I have found that I like better is called Magenta Extra Dark. And in the pot, this looks almost like a plum color. Now it's called Magenta Extra Dark. The color is 430.1. But I like the coloring I get with this. And I do cut it with blender as well, but it's easier to cut with a blender than that stark purple. I like the coloring that I get with this because it is it's very natural looking. It's very translucent looking, and I'm able to work it in places where I'm wanting a little purple. I like to put it around ankles and some around the wrist and the fingers, and different places where I like a little, where it's almost like where you would kind of want blue, but you want that blue to be a little bit more purpley. Then I would use this color. So this is my color of choice more so than purple. Once again, we're talking a Caucasian baby. And once again, we're talking very lightly applied. When I do this, I don't put it on heavily. I put it on lightly on my vinyl, and then I work, and then I go over it with my sponge, and I'm just kind of almost leaving a shadow of coloring, a hint of coloring. I'm not doing a lot of heavy application of these colors when I do this. Sometimes too, I will say that I have used this as a crease coloring if it's a baby that I'm wanting a more purple crease on, and sometimes I will mix this in with, I have another color here that I like to use for creases called Permanent Red Extra Dark. Yeah, that's it. That one looks very, very dark, so this is your true burgundy color. So a lot of times I will take this color and this color and mix it together and come up, and then with a colorless blender, and come up with a crease color that I like, and I've used that for creases. And once again, I recommend that you play with it, on practice pieces and not on the baby that you're getting ready to finish up. Do not wait until you are working on a baby that you want to produce as a finished baby, or that you want to sell, or that you're doing a custom on. Do not use these on that baby. Get a practice piece or a practice baby that you don't mind practicing on, that you're going to donate to a child or to a nursing home or whatever. If you're wanting to see how it looks on a finished doll, get something that you won't be distraught about if it doesn't come out quite the way you want it to, because there is a learning curve. But on the flip side of that equation, I don't want to scare you all half to death, because our students, or my students that have played with it in the last class, I had one that was a little bit, in fact, Mandy's on here today. She was a little bit afraid to try these, and I had another lady, Deborah, who was just all excited, gung-ho, and they both came out with equally good results. So it's not like it can't be learned, or that it's so extremely difficult. It's just a matter of having somebody show you what to do. And Michelle says I use makeup brushes as well, and thank you, Michelle, because I did not explain that. I have a whole bevy of makeup brushes in here, and in class I bring makeup brushes for the students to play with, but I have all sorts of makeup brushes as well, as you can see. And I like to take, like if I'm working on creases, I like to take a small angled makeup brush. I don't even know what mine is, but anyway, and use that to lightly apply the powder in the creases. And once again, looking to see if I don't have that brush right on me, because I've also got, these are just some of my spare brushes. I've also got a whole container over there, but we'll just pretend that's it. But once again, if I were putting my powders in the creases with this, I would go down and lightly tint the crease, and then if I see it wasn't as much coloring as I wanted, I might then kind of, go through it and work it. But I do most of my working it in with a sponge or something. But it's not a method where you're doing this right here, or swirling, working to get that into the creases. So that is a difference in the application. You do swirl it in and you do work it in. Don't get me wrong, it is staining the vinyl, but it's not as heavy-handed of a method. So this is more of a light-handed, light touch, light application until you see how much pigment you have gotten down, and then you can always add more and work it, and then work it in. Because if you start out with a real heavy-handed method before you get a good feel for how these work, you're possibly going to wind up with way too much on there. It says that you can erase these powders, and on paper I'm sure it's not easy. I'm sure it's very easy, but you can erase them with a white artist eraser. And I actually had played around with a potassium and put powder down and erased it, and it erased right off. Obviously on bare vinyl, that's going to be easy to do. If you are erasing over the top of something you've painted, you want to be careful, because if you erase too hard, you could possibly scrub up your paint. And so you want to let your paint layers cure a minimum of 24 hours before you start erasing on the, or doing powders where you're erasing. So I tend to let my paints cure, like I said, for a minimum of 24 hours before I apply powders. And that way, if I needed to erase something, and if it's something I really need to get off with more intensity, I might not use the eraser so much. But you can, like, if you get outside the edge of a crease, you can go across it a little bit and pull some of that, or erase some of that off. Another thing is that, and I have a little sample here. Reborn Effects has a correction fluid that's designed like if you get your paint too intense with them, their paints, if it's organdy or dry paint, I guess. If it's too intense, you can take some of this on a Q-tip or something and rub over it and lighten the paint significantly. This does not completely strip the paint off, but it will lighten it significantly. I have also had success lightening PanPastels with the correction fluid, and it will react pretty much the same way with PanPastels as it does the Reborn Effects paint. And of course, worst case scenario, if you wind up ruining a kit, then you're looking at stripping. And I have been able to strip PanPastels with Winsor & Newton stripper, and I have also used the Reborn Effects has their own line of paint stripper. And I probably think maybe Reborn Effects is a little bit, sometimes that's a little bit more of an intense stripper than, I don't know, I've alternated between the two because I recently had to strip a kit that I messed up the paint job. It wasn't the PanPastels I messed up, I didn't get that far, it was painting. And I had to strip it, and I wound up going over it with Winsor & Newton stripper, and then going back and stripping some with the Reborn Effects stripper, and then going back over it with Winsor & Newton stripper too, because it took me forever to get all the paint off the kit, because the Reborn Effects paints do bond to the vinyl very well. So that's a little side note there. But anyway, getting back to colors, so I'm recommended those two colors to use for the blushing and purple tones. Told you about the yellow ochre, the blue, and the purple. I have another color here that I have used sparingly, and once again, this is a color that you kind of have to use sparingly, but it's called Permanent Red Shade. It's 340.3, and you can also mix some of the other colors with this and use this for crease coloring. This is a good blush coloring. This is a good true red. So that's one of the colors that I keep that I like to use. And then I have one more red that is a very vibrant red. It's called Permanent. This one was Permanent. Let's see, what's the difference? This is Permanent Red Shade, and then this is Permanent Red, and it's 340.5, and it's a brighter red. And if I remember correctly in my art terminology, because I don't have an art degree, so but if I remember correctly, shade means that it's actually had a darker color like black, I believe it is, added to it to tone the coloring. And tint means that it's had a white to lighten it. I believe I've got that in the right order, not reversed. So, which kind of makes sense to me, because I'll hold these two side by side. So there's your Permanent Red, and there's your Permanent Red Shade. And you can see that one's darker. And yes, that one is a little more opaque than the other. But I don't, once again, it's very translucent on the vinyl. I haven't had any problems with my babies looking unnatural. So those are the colors that I use most often with my Caucasian babies. I don't use them all the time on every baby. I pick and choose. And I tend to use these sparingly. I don't use them as extensively as April does in her tutorial, just because I've enjoyed using my paints, and so I like to do a lot of my work with paints. Once the PanPastels have been applied to the kit, I think April says in her she likes to wait 24 hours before she seals them, and I have done that before, but I don't always. You don't have to, but they do need to be set with a fixative. And where this idea comes from, I was originally a user of Baby Effects paints by Melissa George, and at one point Melissa George came out with her own line of powders, and the way that she recommended using her powders was to apply them to the vinyl and to set them with a fixative that she had called Sheer Bond, and you mixed it with some water and pounced over it to spread it, and that was how you set your powder so that they did not lift up. I tried the Baby Effects powders. The first line of powders she came out with were not pigmented enough, and I didn't get a good stain with them. The second line that she came out with, they went back and made them more intense in pigment, and they were better, and I used those some. And then right after that, shortly around that same time, I got into trying the PanPastels, because I was looking for something that I could use like hers, but that I just wasn't 100% sold on the pigmentation of those, and that was just my personal feeling. So if you were to ask me who I'm most most follow after, or what method, or where I got my ideas on how to use the way I use my powders, I would say it came from, originally it came from the way Melissa George demonstrated using her powders. So and of course during all that whole time the Reborn Effects went out of business and she quit producing all that as well, and so I also, you know, knew it wasn't going to be an ongoing thing. I don't do exactly what she was doing either, and she has a whole sheet which I have a copy of that shows how to shade and where to put what colors and what colors she used, a lot of different colors. But that is a little bit of kind of where I got the idea of, okay, if I could find something else that's a little bit different, that's not a makeup, that is a pigmented powder, and then I would probably use it the same way. And then also when I ran across the PanPastels, they do recommend using a spray fixative over them, like when you're painting on paper or whatever, to spray something over them as a spray fixative to set them before you move on with the other media. So that is where all this idea came about, and that's kind of where I got my process from. So along the time that Reborn Effects was being produced, and they knew that a lot of us like to paint with powders, and so they said that we could use their sealer to set our powders. Now they have an air dry varnishing sealing system that is a two-part system that consists of a sealer that you put on the paints when you get done painting, and what this does is sets your paints and protects your paints from scratching and scraping and rubbing off the vinyl. It's just a layer of protection to the paint. And then once that is cured, they have an air dry varnish that is an ultra matte air dry varnish, and you apply that, and that mattes down the piece and adds just an extra protective layer to the baby. The air dry matte varnish can actually be removed with alcohol if over time it starts showing where the baby starts needing a touch-up or whatever. And what the sealer does is it protects the paint and locks the paint down, so that if you have applied the air dry varnish and you want to remove and reapply the air dry varnish later, you can do that, removing it with a little alcohol and not remove the paints, because you've got this sealer layer in between the paints and the varnish acting as a barrier that holds your paint down. So if you have put powders on your paints and you put the sealer over your powder, then you've also locked the powders down, so that when you put your final varnish, if you later for whatever reason want to take the varnish off and redo it, or you just want to touch up the varnish, or you want to go over it with take the varnish layer off and add some more paint to touch up a baby because it's been worn by the buyer, maybe it was a kid's doll and it's been played with a lot or whatever, then you can do that. So those will be reasons why you might take the varnish off. One of the biggest one being that if you need to repaint a doll, you would want to remove the varnish layer, and that would then bring it down to where your sealer layer is, and you can always paint over sealer. So you would then add more paint, touch up the doll, and then reseal it and then varnish it. So when you get done using your PanPastels, you're going to apply your sealer. Now they also have a spray sealer. And basically it's just this in the spray bottle. I think this has a little less matting agent in it, but when you spray this, it doesn't mist out. It still kind of goes on kind of thick, so you still wind up having to pounce it out with a wedge, but it does make it nice to be able to spray it. So you can do, so if you have this, you can use this. If you don't and you have the regular sealer, you can just squirt that out onto a palette, use your wedge and pounce it on, let it dry for 24 hours, and then you're good to go with adding more layers of paint. If you want to, at that point, do some final blushing and a final blending color on your baby, like I often do, then you can do that. And then once you're done, you will reseal again and then let your baby cure and then varnish it. So that's that. And lastly, I use, more than anything, I use PanPastels for painting my AA babies or shading my AA babies. I'm still working through my own methods of producing AA babies. I've been trying to get darker skin tones, and the last baby that I just sold was Alexander by ocher, and he was a darker AA baby with darker shading, and I was very happy with how he turned out. I had a couple of boo-boo spots on him where I had not gotten his initial primer on as smoothly as I should have. I did not use the Reborn Effects primer. I used a different brand that I had on hand because I was out of Reborn Effects primer at the time, and it was a brand that tends to go a little bit thicker, and I did not realize I had a few spots that the primer was a little uneven. So when I got ready to shade the baby with the PanPastels, the spots that were uneven picked up more of the shading coloring. So he had a little bit of uneven spots, but it wasn't bad. And the lady that wound up buying him was still thrilled with him, and I, you know, I disclosed all that before he was sold. But anyway, the two colors that I like using for my AA babies, and I mix and I use them alternately with each other, is Burnt Sienna Extra Dark, which you can see it's a nice chocolate brown. I mean, it's burnt sienna, which, you know, I always thought of when I think of sienna. I don't know why I always thought of reddish brown, but it's a nice chocolate brown. And then this is Red Iron Oxide Extra Dark. And that one does have a slight reddish tint. I like to use this one for shading, and I like to use this darker one for creasing coloring, but sometimes I alternate the two, and it just kind of depends. And when you wind up doing creases with one color and then going around and shading with the other color, they kind of blend on the vinyl a little bit together too, but the effect is very nice. I do have another color. Let's see, this is Red Iron Oxide Shade, but it is a lighter red. I haven't really found it. As you can see, it doesn't even look like I've used it. I haven't really liked that color or needed to use that color or thought I wanted to use it, so it's not one that I've really played with. And then I've got another one called Burnt Sienna Shade, which is a lighter, almost like a milk chocolate color. And I have played with that one a little bit to mix, and I'm more so mixing it in with one of the others to lighten it. So these are some of the colors I've got here that I've been playing with on the AA babies. I bought a black thinking I might want to use black on an AA baby, but I haven't really cared for any of the look that I've on any of the test pieces that I did with it. I thought I might use it like darkening around the knuckles and stuff, but I didn't like the way it looked. I actually liked using this this 740.1. I forgot to give you the number. 740.1 Burnt Sienna Extra Dark. I like using that for the dark shading, for the creases and around the knuckles and whatnot. And then the 380.1 Red Iron Oxide Extra Dark is a color that I use for the shading colors, like fatty areas and stuff where I want more shading, and around the nose and mouth and that kind of thing. So those are my recommended colors. Like I said, there are a few other colors that April uses in her tutorial. Feel free to try them. I highly recommend her tutorial. It is excellent in helping you to understand the PanPastels and how they work, and where you want to apply coloring and shading and things like that. And then just decide which colors you like best. You may like hers and want to go with them. You may like mine. You may like some of both. You may decide you want to do something entirely different. So that is the wonderful thing about Reborn Doll art, is everybody has their own viewpoint of what they like, and everybody has their own signature style. And so that's the great thing about it. Before I go really quick, I was going to show you, let me make sure I don't have all this on me. I have a baby here, the only baby I have in the nursery right now, because I've sold everything that I had made up, but Baby Tasty by Marina Winters. I think I've showed you guys her before, but I wanted to pull her up here. And once again, please know that the way she looks in person and the way she looks on my monitor may not be exactly the same, or on your monitor, because I don't have the greatest lighting here. But Baby Tasty was painted entirely with Reborn Effects air dry paints, and she was shaded with PanPastels, and her crease coloring was done with PanPastels. So that's why I wanted to show her to you. And she was done, I can't remember how long ago. I had to have to look on her bottom at her birthday, but she's been done quite a while now, so a couple of months, 2 or 3 months. I'll look in a minute. So that gives you another idea of how she's looking after time. And she's sealed with the Reborn Effects air dry sealers and the air dry ultra matte varnish as well, and she's holding up really well. So I've been very happy with all that. And I don't know if you can see, but like she's got a little bit more of a yellow nose, and that's where I put the yellow PanPastel. I don't think it's showing up in here, but there's, like, I use some of that color that's kind of purpley looking around these areas and inside the ear and stuff like that to give that some shading. So as you can see, when I say that I'm very subtle with it, that's what I'm talking about. I'm not using a lot of it. I'm just shading a little bit with it. So, and if you go back and look through pictures of Tacey, she looks much better in person than she does on my screen anyway. Tacey's birthday was, let me look at her bottom when I signed her. November the 14th of 2017. So November, December, January, February, March, April. It's about 5 months ago that I made this baby. And as you can see, all her coloring is still holding up very well. So you can see that the Reborn Effects paints are very good paints. You can see that the PanPastels do hold up well. You can see that she's not cracking, peeling, splitting, and she's not shiny. The varnish is doing really well. So there you go. So anyway, I know I've thrown a lot of information at you today. Thank you to those of you who have stuck with me through the whole conversation. Mandy says Tacey wants to come live with me. Mandy saw Tacey in class. Mandy was in my last class. She's actually taking 2 of my classes now. And I took Tacey with me, and I took Alexander with me, and all the ladies fell in love with Tacey, and Mandy really wants to take Tacey home. So who knows? Mandy has already gotten a couple of my babies. She may wind up getting another one. But I hope you guys have had a blessed and wonderful Easter. Have a great rest of your weekend and a wonderful week. And I'm going to sign off for now. If you got any questions, as always, don't hesitate to write me, and have a great day.